Before the kingdom had a name, before its flag rose over the high cliffs, before its laws were etched in gold and fear, there was a girl named Elira. She was not born noble. She was not chosen by stars. She had no bloodline to claim nor prophecy to fulfill. But she saw what others would not, and she spoke what no one dared. She was 15 when the first stones of the throne hall were laid. The king was not yet crowned, only a warlord with ambition and a hunger wrapped in silk. He had won 100 battles but feared a single truth. Elira saw it in him. She saw it in the way he walked the fields of the dead without kneeling, the way he raised temples before burying the bones beneath them. She saw the truth of what he built, not a kingdom but a silence. And she spoke. It was a market day when she rose atop a barrel and called the crowd to listen. Her voice was not loud but the words made it so. This man builds his throne on graves, she said. His gold is soaked in the cries of widows. His law is made of ash. You call him savior. But he is only a sword with a crown waiting to fall. The people listened, not because they agreed but because her words bent the air. Even the wind paused to hear her. She did not shout. She did not curse. She named. She revealed. And that is more dangerous than any rebellion. The king heard. Or rather, those who would make him king told him. They came with their scrolls and their knives, their sealed letters and wet ink, and whispered Elira's name like a spell to be broken. He did not have her killed. That would have made her a martyr. Instead, he came to her himself, cloaked in blue and gold, surrounded by a dozen guards and a priest who spoke in tongues. He found her not running but sitting in a broken orchard, speaking to the roots of a half-dead fig tree. You speak poison, he said, but I offer you a cure. She looked at him with eyes that had never blinked at power. You mistake truth for poison, she said. But it will rot your throne all the same. He smiled then, with teeth that wanted blood but pretended to want peace. Then I will build it on your silence. They dragged her not to a cell, not to a grave, but to the place where the throne would one day stand. The foundation was still wet with lime and labor. No one watched. No records were kept. Only the king, the guards, and the stonecutters with eyes turned away. They chained her there beneath the stones. Not killed. Not buried. Bound. Her wrists were wrapped in iron carved with ancient runes meant to sever name from flesh, voice from wind, memory from time. They thought it would undo her. But metal remembers. And so does stone. Years passed. Then decades. The kingdom rose above her. The throne was placed, gilded, high-backed, encrusted with emeralds stolen from foreign tombs. Kings came and went. Wars bloomed and withered. Maps redrew themselves like scars on old skin. Elira remained. They thought her dead. They believed time had taken her. But time cannot digest what is sealed in truth. Her body lay still but her voice did not. Each midnight, it stirred, not in words but in echoes. In iron groans. In the dreams of those who sat the throne. No one could say why the marble sometimes cracked on cold nights. Or why the roses outside the palace gates never bloomed. Or why children born under certain moons spoke only in whispers until their 13th year. It was her. Always her. Under moonless skies, the kingdom flourished like a thorned rose, bloody at its base, dazzling at a distance. Its palaces gleamed with stolen gold, its rivers shimmered with the spoils of conquest. The people bowed low and smiled with tight lips, their spines bent not out of reverence but survival. The kings and queens who ruled them believed their right was sealed in the heavens, anointed by the stars themselves. They wore their lineage like armor, paraded their bloodline as sacred scripture. But the throne they worshipped, the one each monarch claimed with trembling hands and iron breath, was no divine gift. It was a wound carved into the world, and it fed not on prayer but on silence. On lies. On what was buried. They did not know that beneath the gilded throne room, under polished marble and centuries of royal arrogance, a chain still held tight around something that once had a name. A girl. A voice. A truth too bright to let live. Her story had long since been scoured from scroll and song. But stories do not need ink to endure. They root into stone. They hide in iron. They sleep in breath. And hers was the kind that learned to wait. The first king had bound her beneath the throne to make a symbol, not of punishment but of warning. Her silence was meant to seal his power, a living curse embedded in foundation. As generations passed, no ruler asked what lies had birthed their reign. None questioned why the crown was always a little heavier at night. Why the floor sometimes pulsed like a heartbeat, just beneath the soles of their feet. Whispers remained. Servants claimed to hear weeping under the tiles during the midnight shift. One girl who had scrubbed the edge of the dais every night for years, swore that once, just once, she felt the stone breathe. Her fingers had tingled as though touching flesh instead of rock. She told her sister in a hush. By morning she had vanished. Her apron still hung on the kitchen hook, damp with river soap. But the monarchs did not listen to whispers. They held court with priests who blessed their blood and erased their doubts. They painted murals of divine conquest, telling tales of gods who wept with joy when the first king rose. Their scribes rewrote history like it was clay, smoothing out jagged truths, burning old songs. In these tales, the throne was a gift from the sky, a heavenly anvil upon which justice was forged. They did not mention the girl. They did not mention the scream that was never allowed to echo. Still, the throne remembered. There was a night every generation, not written in any calendar, not marked by any star, when the crown would tremble. It was always the moment before it touched the new monarch's head. It would quiver just slightly like it sensed something watching. Some thought it was excitement, a spark of destiny. Others, especially the older guards, looked away in that moment, murmuring prayers too old to have names. But always the ritual continued. Always the crown was lowered. And always the throne accepted the weight. But it was not loyalty that kept the people silent. It was what the throne did to those who questioned. One prince, born with too much kindness and too little fear, once asked his tutor where the stone came from. He was 8 years old and he had felt something underfoot, a cold that sank through his slippers and into his bones. The tutor went pale, then smiled too wide. "From the gods," he whispered, and the lesson turned to numbers. That night, the prince dreamed of chains that bled, of a mouth that screamed but made no sound. He awoke sobbing. 3 days later he fell down the eastern stairwell. His foot slipped, they said. The stone was wet. The stain never quite left the marble. The kingdom learned not to look too long at the ground. Still, the land itself grew uneasy. The trees at the edge of the palace walls began to twist, their branches curling like fingers toward the dome. Birds no longer nested in the tallest spires. Storms gathered more often, lightning sometimes striking too close as though called. The royal seers began to murmur of omens, not in public, but in the folds of dark chambers where candles trembled without wind. An old woman who had served 5 kings, once refused to anoint the next. "The crown listens," she said, "and it hungers." Her tongue was found buried in salt, her body never recovered. But the hunger did not begin with her. It began the moment truth was silenced. And hunger, when denied, becomes fire. The throne, for all its grandeur, bore a flaw. It was made not from stone alone, but from silence layered thick and cursed to stillness. And silence, when stretched across centuries, begins to fray. It was in the cracks that the truth stirred. In the spaces no one dared clean too closely. In the moments just after midnight when the palace slept. Some say the throne began to hum. The sound was low at first, like a distant wind trapped underground. It came from the center of the hall, rising through the marble like breath through cloth. Only those closest to it noticed, the chamber guards, the night scribes. They would pause, brows furrowed, then shake it off. "The old stones shift," they'd say. "The palace settles." But stone does not settle with breath. And palaces do not weep. Then came the shadows. They did not move like torchlight. They had no source. They flickered across the throne room in patterns too deliberate to be chance. Like fingers. Like chains. Once, during a night ceremony, the coronation of a young queen whose eyes glinted like fresh obsidian, the light from every candelabra died in unison as the crown touched her head. Only for a moment. Just a breath. But when the light returned, the queen's face was wet. She claimed it was sweat. But sweat does not run red. And none dared to question. Behind her, the throne gleamed. And still the kingdom thrived. Or seemed to. Bread was plentiful. The markets rang with music and copper. The temples shone like mirrors in the sun. But in the alleys, children dreamed of screams. In the fields, farmers found stones buried in the soil, shaped like links. In the bathhouses, the walls whispered names no one remembered teaching. A city so steeped in false peace cannot help but crack. And beneath it all, the chained one waited. She no longer remembered the taste of air, the shape of daylight. But she remembered her name. Not in full, the syllables had been carved away, but in essence. She remembered that she had once stood tall, her voice a bell that called a people to rise. She remembered that the first king had feared her truth more than death. And that he had bound her not to destroy her, but to bury the evidence. But stone does not forget. And neither does a voice denied. Every lie built atop her added another link to the chain, but also another spark. Every injustice ruled from the throne became a thread in the fabric of her return. The throne believed it drank power from her silence. But it misunderstood silence. It is not surrender. It is pressure. It is time collecting teeth. And the teeth were beginning to show. On a night when the moon hung low and the stars hid behind ash-colored clouds, a maid wandered into the throne room. She was young, no more than 16, and had lost her way in the endless corridors. She stepped across the marble to reorient herself, and stopped. Her foot met something soft. Not fabric. Not moss. It was warm. She looked down and saw nothing. But the warmth stayed. And then, faintly, she heard it, a heartbeat pulsing up through the stone. Slow. Heavy. Endless. She did not scream. She bowed her head. And for the first time in her life, she spoke a name she did not remember learning. The throne shuddered. It was not much. Just a twitch. But every candle in the palace flared. That was the night the queen began to dream in chains. Not her own but another's. Dreams of rusted links coiling through the sky. Of a girl with hollow eyes and a mouth stitched with stars. Of a truth that burned so fiercely it made the world blink. She awoke every morning with blood beneath her nails and no memory of how it got there. She stopped speaking at night. She began to walk with lighter steps as though afraid of waking something. Still she sat on the throne. Still the people bowed. But they began to listen. Not to their monarch but to the hum. Came more often now. Louder. The sound of iron breathing. Of something waiting. Of a voice not yet returned but already echoing. And in the deepest roots of the palace, where stone met earth and earth met curse, the chains began to twitch. One link loosened. Just enough to sing. Just enough to promise. The throne fed on lies. But even lies rot. And beneath every lie the truth was learning to stand. In the quarter where roofs wept in the rain and rats knew the names of children, Nereus was born beneath a tattered cloth ceiling. Her mother labored in silence, alone, and by the time her breath stilled, Nereus was already wailing into a world that did not want her. No priest blessed her. No name was carved into the registry. But the wind knew her. The soot-streaked crows that nested in chimney holes seemed to follow her steps. And sometimes when she cried as an infant, glass cracked. She grew where weeds clawed between bricks, where alley dogs barked at unseen things, where lanterns flickered even without wind. There was no schooling for girls like her. No sanctuary but the dark. She learned to live on the edges of coin and kindness, stealing bread with quiet hands, weaving wire and bone into trinkets she sold for copper scraps. But even in the smoke-choked air of the city's forgotten edge, Nereus was not ordinary. Her eyes, a color between rust and storm, did not flinch. And when others cried, she listened. It began when she was 12. The first dream. She stood in a hallway she did not know, lined with broken mirrors. At the end was a door made of stone, pulsing with light not from candles but from within itself. Behind it, singing. Not music. Not human. But sound shaped like iron. It wrapped itself around her spine and whispered her name in a language older than breath. When she woke, her palms ached. She had gripped her blanket so tightly the fabric tore. Each night after, the dream returned, never quite the same but always with the song. She told no one. In the quarter, talk of strange things drew blades or cages. So she kept her silence and listened. And the more she listened, the more the world seemed to hum. It was not just the dream. By 14 she could feel the sound behind walls. In cellar bricks and wet wood. A kind of vibration. A pressure. Some days her head rang with it. Some nights the walls whispered. Not with voices but with memory. She'd press her ear to the stones and hear crying that had no throat. Chains that had no jailer. Sometimes laughter, brittle and sharp, from a place buried far beneath the city's veins. No one else seemed to notice. Then came the night the storm hit. The wind tore roofs like paper and water flooded streets like veins bleeding upward. The rich fled to the inner wards. The poor stayed in place and prayed. Nereus sat on the second floor of a ruined bathhouse, curled in a window with broken shutters, staring into the rain. But she did not see lightning. She saw a light beneath the earth. It flickering. And she heard it again, the voice in the iron song. Closer now. It said one word, come. So she followed. Not with ceremony. Not with maps. Just with instinct. She began walking through the city by night, guided by sound only she could feel. She crossed markets closed for curfew, alleys that stank of rotted hope, tunnels abandoned for decades. She moved through the body of the city like a needle through cloth, always tugged forward by that buried melody. She descended into forgotten catacombs. Slipped through grates no child should know. Found doors that had no keyholes and still opened. She walked with bare feet to feel the pulse in the ground. Past piles of bones too old to name, roots grown around faces. At the lowest place, where even shadows were afraid to settle, her hand brushed something cold. A link. Slick with age and wet with something that was not water. She pulled back, breath held, but it called again. I have been waiting. The words were not sound. They arrived in her chest like a second heartbeat. A rhythm of memory. She touched the chain again. This time it did not resist. It thrummed beneath her fingers, like it recognized her. Like it had been calling only her. A vision struck her then. Not of sight but of knowing. A girl older than time, stood in fire and spoke a truth that shook mountains. A king, afraid, built a throne atop her silence. The chain, forged not by blacksmiths but by betrayal. The voice, not dead, only buried. Not forgotten, only patient. Nearest fell to her knees, trembling. When she came to, her palms were scorched with a mark, a spiral of links burned into flesh. The chain was silent. But something had changed. The world above shifted. Nearest returned to the surface before dawn. No one saw her emerge. But crows followed her now, silent as ink. Her footsteps rang slightly too loud. Metal near her warped. A merchant's coin dish buckled when she passed. Nails peeled from doors. The old listened to her with unease. The young stared like she was a question they didn't know how to ask. Still she said nothing. The dreams changed. She no longer saw mirrors. Now there were walls of bone. A staircase of tongues. And always the chain. Winding through every image like a thread pulled through a wound. She returned to the catacombs. Again and again. Each time the path seemed shorter. The ruins responded to her. Stones moved. Doors sighed open. And the chain grew warmer under her hand. She began to speak to it, in her thoughts at first, then aloud. She didn't know why. It felt right. Sometimes it answered. It told her its name had been stolen, but it remembered how it burned. That kings fed on its silence. That truth once buried grows teeth. It told her she was the first to truly hear. That others had passed by. Some had touched the chain. One girl had even wept on it. But none had stayed. None had listened. You are the echo, the voice said. And the key. Nearest did not understand. She only knew she had begun to change. Her voice grew deeper, fuller, as if carrying something beyond her years. Her eyes no longer just saw, they revealed. She could look at a wall and feel the secrets pressed behind it. She could place her hand on a coin and know who had stolen it. Once, she brushed a guard's sleeve and saw the child he had abandoned. Fear began to follow her. Not her own. Others. The market women stopped speaking when she passed. Children no longer invited her into games. Her landlord bolted the door even when she stood outside in rain. She did not mind. She had the chain. By 17 she knew what must be done. The voice told her the throne's foundation was cracked. That its hunger was growing. That it would soon demand more than silence. That if no one acted it would bury another century. She did not ask how she was meant to stop it. The chain pulsed with memory. And memory teaches. She learned to walk unnoticed. To move between moments. To shape sound with her breath. She took no weapon, only a shard of rusted mirror and a feather from the crow who perched at her window each dusk. Her journey was not one of battle. It was one of unveiling. The palace lay at the city's heart. Glistening, gold-veined, bloated with power. A place she had never been, never thought to reach. Yet the night she walked there no one stopped her. Guards blinked and saw only wind. Doors opened. The marble shivered. Beneath the throne room she found the old passage. The chain led her. It wound like memory, like an old scar rediscovered. In the silence of the underground she walked alone. But the stones pulsed with breath. The girl in the chain had waited centuries. But now she whispered. Soon, she said. Soon. Nearest knelt beside the chain and whispered back, I will open the wound. And the chain sang. The queen sat high upon the throne, its gold spine pressing against her back like a judgment. Her crown, forged in flame and lined with rubies the size of raindrops, shone as if the sun itself bent to her rule. Her name echoed across cities, Queen Virel the Unbending, Virel the Flame. She had ended 5 rebellions, drowned her sister in molten gold for daring to speak out of turn, and rewritten the laws so that even the wind required her permission to enter court. Her voice was iron wrapped in honey. Her smile cut deeper than knives. But the stone beneath her feet had grown cold. Not the ordinary chill of morning dew or winter's creeping breath. This was a cold that made her bones flinch. A deep, living cold, ancient, patient. She first noticed it on a night when lightning cracked without rain and the stars vanished behind a sky that pulsed like a bruise. The chamber had been silent, the courtiers dismissed, and as she rose from the throne she felt it, a tremble through her heel, a breath rising not from the air but from the floor. She said nothing. Not then. But her silence was not from fear, not yet. She was a queen who ruled without apology. Fear was for traders and peasants. But even so, that night she had her chambers lit with twice the usual fire. She dismissed her scribe and slept alone. In the days that followed, the cold deepened. It clung to her garments even when the hearth blazed. The mirror in her dressing room began to flicker, not with flame but with something else. At first it was small, the faint suggestion of another shape just behind her own reflection, flickering like a candle's afterimage. Then one morning, as she stood robed and regal, she saw it clearly. A girl. Not a servant. Not herself. A stranger. Young, cloaked in shadows, with eyes that shone like forged iron. Her mouth did not move, but her stare sliced through glass. Varel stepped back, heart stammering once, before she caught herself. She smashed the mirror with her bare hand. The shards bled her, but she made no sound. She summoned her high council the next morning. They arrived dressed in ceremonial violet and bone, their faces tense from sleepless nights. Whispers had been moving through the palace, of footsteps behind walls, of locks snapping open without hands, of paintings blinking. Varel listened. Then she ordered every mirror removed from the palace. Smashed. Ground. Buried in lime. Reflection is a luxury, she said. Truth lives in action. But it was not truth she feared. It was memory. Her advisors began to turn on one another. In the great hall, arguments broke out between those who had once sworn blood oaths together. Some said the queen was cursed. Others whispered the throne was. A few, the oldest, said something had awakened beneath the palace. That when truth is buried too deep, it becomes a root. And roots grow. She had those men taken away. Still, the whispers would not die. She ordered every tunnel beneath the palace sealed. The ancient paths used by servants, secret passages once carved by masons for kings too paranoid to walk in open light, all closed. Stone upon stone. Earth poured in, melted, hardened. She hired diggers to track the old maps and burn them. She had every page of every architectural record gathered and set ablaze in the southern courtyard. As the smoke rose, she felt a flicker of relief. But in the smoke, some claimed they saw shapes. Chains. That same night, 3 of the diggers vanished. The queen did not sleep. She sat in her chamber with a goblet of black honey wine, watching the wall. Not because anything moved, but because she expected it to. She could feel something behind it. The silence had weight now, not the calm of peace but the stillness of waiting. Like something drawing breath before it spoke. One by one her servants quit. Some claimed sickness. Others simply disappeared. A girl who had combed the queen's hair since youth was found curled in the laundry basin, her mouth filled with ashes. I heard singing, she'd written in soot on the wall. It was so beautiful. Varel tore down the wall herself. But the sound remained. Beneath the floorboards. Inside the stone. It came like a hum some nights. Low like wind in a distant mine. Other nights, it rose, a tremor that moved through the bedposts and curled around her ribs. She began wearing her crown at night. As if its weight could shield her. She still ruled, though now her voice cracked. Her orders grew erratic. She declared war on a neighboring province for painting their chapel in silver, a color she suddenly claimed was traitors' blood. She banned music. She ordered every historian in the city to present their records of the first king's reign, and when they could not, she burned the Hall of Archives to the ground. But truth is not paper. It does not die in fire. One morning she found her crown missing. No thief had breached her chambers. No lock was broken. The crown was gone. In its place, a single black feather. Small. Ordinary. But when she touched it, her fingers numbed. She had the entire palace searched. No trace of the crown. No sign of entry. Her guards were interrogated. 2 were executed. One, an old man with only one hand, said he had seen a girl pass through the hall. Not walking. Moving. Like smoke. Her eyes were metal, he whispered before his tongue was cut. Varel began to see the girl everywhere. Not in mirrors now, those were gone. But in puddles. In polished floors. In the shine of a blade. Always the same face, calm, dark, unspeaking. Watching. And in those eyes, Varel saw the beginning of something. Not revenge. Not fury. Judgment. She ordered priests to perform rites of cleansing across the throne room. The flames turned blue. One priest screamed and leapt from the dome. Another fell to their knees and muttered, "I hear her. I hear the one beneath." The queen buried that room in silence. No more rites. She stopped sitting on the throne. At first she claimed it was to preserve its power. That only on sacred days would she sit. But in truth the last time she had touched it, her skin had blistered. The gold had hummed. And when she sat, the stone beneath it breathed. The truth could no longer be drowned. Word spread beyond the palace. Of the queen who feared her own floor. Of servants who vanished into stone. Of walls that wept rust. Of a girl, unnamed, unseen, moving through the kingdom like a shadow on fire. The people began to speak of her not as rumor, but as prophecy. Some said she had returned from death. Others claimed she was the voice of the buried. All agreed she was coming for the throne. Varel sealed the gates, tripled her guards, banned all gatherings. But even in silence, truth whispered. It moved in the wind, in the cracks, in the pulse of the ground beneath their feet. One night, in her chambers, the queen opened her eyes to find the girl at the foot of her bed. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply was. And Varel, fierce, ruthless, born of fire and war, could not scream. She could only tremble. Because in that moment she understood. This was not a girl. This was a reckoning. The moon turned to ash. Not with fire, not with smoke, but with shadow, vast and slow, veiling its silver with the dark rust of blood. All across the kingdom, windows closed and fires were left unlit. Old women muttered the names of forgotten saints. Children pressed their hands to their chests and swore they heard the stone sigh. But beneath the palace, beneath the gold-tipped dome, beneath the carved lions and banners of royal conquest, the forgotten gathered. They did not wear armor. They did not bear flags. They wore rags stitched from silence, scars threaded with names no longer spoken, eyes heavy with the weight of all that had been taken from them. They came barefoot, cloaked in soot and resolve. They came from the tenements, the orphan quarters, the hollowed ruins where once stood gardens and now stood graves. They came because they had dreamed the same dream, of a chain that sang, of a voice that had waited, of a name erased but not extinguished. And they followed Nereus. She was not crowned, not anointed. She walked without escort, without trumpet. But the path opened before her. The stones did not tremble under her feet, they welcomed her. The same passageway she had once crept through alone now rang with the quiet rhythm of feet. Dozens, then hundreds. Each one carried by memory. Each one carrying memory in turn. Some clutched tokens. A locket crushed beneath a soldier's boot, a child's shoe, a scrap of paper with a forbidden prayer. Some brought no objects, only their grief, their rage, their questions that had never been answered. All brought silence. Not the silence of fear, but the kind that comes before a storm. Midnight drew near. The moon above reached its fullest shadow, and in that moment the palace groaned. The marble wept. And the chain, deep beneath the gilded throne, began to sing. The sound was not music, not melody. It was older. It was the language of forged truth. It echoed off the walls of the catacombs, wound through the arches, pressed into the bones of those who had followed Nereus. One by one they stopped. Eyes closed. Mouths parted. As if remembering something not from their lives but from their blood. From their ancestors. From something passed down through silence, through the spaces and stories, through lullabies never finished. The chain rose. Not in haste. Not in fury. It did not snap or shatter. It unwound. Slowly. Deliberately. With the precision of memory long denied. It slithered up from the deepest chamber, shedding dust and centuries. Its iron was not rusted but blood-dark, slick with time. It moved like breath, like tide, like the inhale of something waking. And it carried her. The one who had been bound. She did not look as they remembered, because none could truly remember. But all knew. Her form shimmered, carved from shadow and stone and the shimmer of firelight on oil. Her hair trailed like smoke. Her mouth bore no wound, no gag, and yet still did not speak. Her eyes, when they opened, were voids filled with stars. The girl who had been bound beneath the throne was no longer girl. She was reckoning. The chain carried her upward, through the ruins, past the columns, toward the ceiling where the stones had begun to tremble. Above, in the throne room, Queen Varel stood rigid. She had not slept in days. Her sword was unsheathed, its hilt slick with sweat. Her guards had fallen back, not by command but by instinct. The floor beneath her pulsed like a heartbeat. The throne, untouched since the last time she dared sit upon it, now hummed with a sound she could not bear. She did not know what she faced. only that it had come for her. And then the floor cracked. It did not explode. It did not collapse. It opened, a fracture long and jagged, splitting the marble from one end of the dais to the other. Light poured from it. Not sunlight. Not firelight. A deep, glowing red, like the heart of a forge or the inside of a wound. And from it rose a sound, the chain's song multiplied now, echoed by hundreds of voices below. Then the girl emerged. Nearest stepped into the throne room first. She walked alone, but the sound behind her was many. The chain curled behind her ankles like a living shadow. Her hands were empty. Her face calm. Her eyes, no longer merely human, shimmered like storm-polished metal. Queen Virel lifted her sword. "You will not take this from me," she said. But her voice cracked. The floor beneath her thudded once. A pulse. Her balance wavered. The weight of the sword dragged her forward slightly, as if gravity itself had turned against her. Nearest did not reply. The chain behind her sang. From the split floor came others, the forgotten, the buried. One by one they entered the chamber. Slowly. Silently. They did not shout. They did not charge. They stood in rows along the broken marble, watching. Witnessing. And then the girl rose. Not Nearest. The one who had waited. Her body shimmered as it passed through the breach. Her hair swept upward, weightless. The chains that had once bound her now unfurled like wings. She hovered above the throne. Not touching it. Not reclaiming it. Judging it. Virel stumbled back. The weight beneath her feet had changed. The stone had turned soft. Not like mud but like breath. Alive. Reacting. The queen tried to speak. Tried to raise her sword. But her arm trembled. The blade dipped. "You buried us," Nearest said, her voice rising for the first time. The sound struck like wind through iron gates. It echoed. It multiplied. It filled the chamber with a sound not loud but vast. A sound that knew too much. "You burned our names. You sealed the tunnels. You gilded a lie and called it divine. But truth does not rot. It roots." The queen fell to one knee. Still she clutched the sword. The throne groaned. Its gold cracked at the base, thin fractures running up its back like veins. One leg buckled slightly. The lion carvings along its arms flaked. The gems embedded in its crown tips fell, one by one, like teeth loosened by time. "I am the wound you made," the forgotten girl said, hovering now above the throne. "And I am the voice that wound carried," said Nearest. Together they moved forward. Virel lifted the sword one last time, not to strike but to defend. But there was no blow. Nearest looked at her. Only looked. And that was enough. The queen's arms dropped. Her knees hit the stone. The sword clattered to the ground, ringing once and lay still. She looked up, and in the girl's eyes she saw not vengeance. Not fire. But a mirror. And in it she saw herself. Not as queen. But as daughter. As child. As girl taught to fear softness. Taught to seal truth to survive. Taught to build power from pain. The throne split behind her. With a great shudder the base cracked wide. Roots, thick and black-veined, pushed up through the fissure. Twisting. Clutching. They coiled around the legs of the throne and pulled. The throne sank. Not into fire. Into silence. Into the wound it had made. The chain rose around the girl once more, not to bind her, but to carry her higher. She stood now atop the broken dais, not as ruler, not as queen, but as something older than both. The voice of all that had been buried. The people below bowed not from fear, but from knowing. And across the city the moon began to emerge from shadow. Not white. Not gold. But iron. Elira rose through the ruin not like smoke, not like vengeance, but like a truth too old to kneel. The chain that once held her did not fall away. It lifted with her, coiling like breath around her limbs, singing as it moved. No iron snapped. No shackle broke. Each link turned smooth with age, dark with memory. In them were names, not carved, not etched, but remembered. Names the kingdom had silenced. Names torn from stone, erased from ledgers, buried without prayer. Each ring a body. A cry. A world. She was not corpse. She was not ghost. She was the answer to every question the kingdom had buried. Her skin glimmered like the hush before a storm. Her eyes held no light, not because they were blind but because they had seen too much. Light did not belong to her now. She had passed through it. Her gaze made no promises. It only weighed, measured, revealed. The queen, still crouched on the splintering throne dais, stared up in silence. Her sword trembled in her hand. She had no name for what stood before her. The girl was gone. This was not Nereus's leader, not a rebel, not a specter of war. This was Elira. And Elira was everything the throne had tried to forget. "You should not be," the queen whispered. Elira did not speak. She stepped forward. The stone beneath her did not crack, it parted, welcoming her. The chain behind her moved with a sound like breathing, like mourning. The air rippled, heavy with all that had been denied. The queen struck. She rose in a single desperate lunge, bringing the sword down in a gleaming arc. It was not hesitation. It was fear sharpened into action, muscle and instinct honed over years of surviving what she created. The blade was pure steel, enchanted, blood-forged, blessed in rights and rights again. But as it met Elira's shoulder, it bent. Not like metal striking stone. Not like magic repelled. It bent as if the blade remembered. The queen staggered back. Her mouth opened, no words coming. Her hands bled around the hilt. The throne behind her groaned. One of its gold-plated arms cracked down the center. The lion's face peeled. The rubies at its base fell like teeth dropped in water. Elira did not move quickly. She did not move angrily. She walked with the stillness of roots climbing through soil. Her chain dragged behind her in silence now, and yet its weight filled the room. She reached the throne. The queen stumbled aside. Not defeated, replaced. Elira looked down at it. Not to sit. She reached out, with one hand only, and touched its crown. The crown rolled. No force. No flourish. Just a single fingertip, and the circlet of power, forged in centuries of silenced pain and gilded with blood, tipped from its velvet cushion and rolled across the stone. The sound it made, soft, ringing, echoed louder than a war cry. As it struck the floor, something deeper broke. Elira turned. And spoke. Her voice was thunder wrapped in breath. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It rolled across the air like a storm through bone. "Every lie built upon my silence ends now." And they did. Across the palace, walls groaned. Tapestries curled inward, revealing old markings hidden behind paint. In the royal chambers, scrolls turned to ash. In the libraries, rewritten books unfurled into blank pages. In the archives, sealed ledgers bled ink down their spines. Priests dropped to their knees, tongues blackening. The city's fountains turned dark, not poisoned, not cursed, but truth-touched. And across the kingdom, people remembered. Old names returned to their mouths. Lost songs uncurled in grandmothers' throats. Gravestones long blank revealed letters. Children began dreaming of things they'd never been taught. The silence that had held for so long cracked wide open. The queen fell. Not by strike. Not by spell. She fell under the weight of knowing. Elira said no more. She turned back toward the light pouring through the ruined dome, the chain rising behind her like a river. She did not reclaim the throne. She did not touch the crown. She had no need. The kingdom had heard her. And that was enough. The queen ran. She did not shout for her guards. There were none left. She did not call for her advisors. They had vanished into corridors that no longer opened. She ran in silence, breath ragged, one slipper lost, the hem of her gown streaked with blood and dust. The throne room had broken behind her, the sky above it cracked open, and she had seen her crown roll like a coin spent and useless. So she fled, not with dignity, not with vengeance, only instinct. But the halls had changed. What once led to chambers and balconies now turned inward. Marble walls shifted like breath held too long. The tapestries were gone. The chandeliers no longer flickered. There were no more echoes of power. Only the pulse of stone beneath her feet, guiding her not toward escape, but toward judgment. Every step she took led her deeper. She tried the servants' corridor, it sealed behind her with no sound. She took the spiral stairs, but the higher she climbed, the colder the walls became until her fingers bled from frost. She turned back. Even the air conspired against her now. The same air that had once carried her name like a hymn now turned thick with dust and the taste of iron. She was queen no longer. She was prey. And still no voice called for her end. No blade chased her. No horn sounded her guilt. There was no trial. No tribunal. No need for confession. The truth was already alive. It filled the palace like smoke, not from fire but from memory burned clean. The truth had no face, no form, but it had weight. It pressed down on every stone she stepped across. It whispered in every reflection, not with cruelty but with clarity. This is what you did. This is who you were. This is what you refused to see. She found herself in a long corridor she had not walked in years, the ancestral hall. Here the walls were lined with portraits, kings and queens robed in gold painted larger than life. They stared down at her with blank eyes as if watching a legacy collapse. But now as she passed, their faces changed. Slowly. Eyes wept ink. Lips cracked. One monarch's crown turned to ash on the canvas. Another's scepter warped into a whip. She turned her face away. But the corridor did not end. And behind her, steps followed, not hurried, not hostile. Just steady. Inevitable. Elira did not chase her. She moved toward her. There was no urgency. No fire in her breath. She did not need to run. The truth carried her like tide, and the world stepped aside for her passage. The people gathered. Not in rebellion. Not in vengeance. They came without weapons. Without shouts. They came because they had seen. And once you see, you cannot unsee. Farmers left their fields. Healers left their herbs. Children stopped playing and followed. The streets filled. The palace steps overflowed. No one called for punishment. They came only to witness. The queen reached the great doors of the east wing, and there at last she stopped. Because beyond them stood the woman she had tried to bury in silence. Elira. Still wrapped in chain. Still bearing the memory of 1,000 stolen names. Still lightless-eyed and unmoving. But no longer bound. Her chain trailed behind her like a river of iron. She held no sword. No crown. Her mouth was still. The queen did not kneel. Her pride, cracked though it was, remained rooted. She lifted her chin. Her voice rasped. I was protecting order. Elira said nothing. The chain stirred behind her. I kept the peace. The queen tried again. You think truth rules a kingdom? Truth tears it apart. Elira stepped forward once. The queen stepped back. You have no right, the queen began. And that was when the chain rose. It did not lash. It did not strike. It curled upward, slowly as though tasting the air, choosing. And then it moved toward the queen's throat, not to choke, not to kill, but to listen. She tried to scream. But it wrapped around her voice. The sound died in her mouth. Not her breath. Not her body. Her voice. It unraveled into silence, the kind that screams cannot pierce. Her lips moved. Her chest heaved. But no sound emerged. The people saw, and did not cheer. There was no triumph here. No celebration. Only stillness. And in that stillness, the truth hummed. Elira turned, her chain trailing behind her, heavy again. She looked to the crowd. She did not speak. She did not raise her hand. But they understood. The queen dropped to her knees. Not because she chose to. Because without her voice, she had nothing to stand on. She had ruled with words, orders, decrees, threats cloaked in elegance. Now she could say none of them. Her power stripped with silence. Elira walked past her. She did not look back. And behind her, the queen began to weep, soundlessly. Her mouth open, her eyes wide. But no noise came. And that silence would echo. It would echo for years. Through the empty halls of the palace. Through the streets once thick with fear. Through the memories of those who had been told to forget. A scream that never ended. A judgment without mercy. A voice that would never again be used to wound. And in its place, the truth.